Shabbat Shalom. Have you ever been your own worst critic? Yeah? We just began the month of Elul, this ramp up of 29 or 30 days leading up into the high holiday season, to the Yamim Noraim, these awesome, awesome days. And the work of the season, our tradition teaches us, is cheshbon hanefesh. Cheshbon hanefesh, an accounting of ourselves, an accounting of our souls, some might say. Earlier this week, in one of our Lair House classes related to the season, we talked about how this Hebrew word, this Hebrew root, cheshbon, seems to be the kind of thinking that's deliberate, not just a fleeting thought that comes and goes, good, bad, nagging, not persistent, but a deliberative thought. So cheshbon hanefesh, the work of this season, this accounting of ourselves, is a deliberative process, a careful process. Sometimes I think about those trials where we hear that the jury has been deliberating for 2 weeks, and try to imagine what that would be like to put a mirror on ourselves and say, what does deliberation look like? To really, really reflect where we've been in the past year, how we can do better, when we can look at ourselves and say, in the words of the criminal justice or something like that system, guilty or not guilty, when we need more time to think about it, when we have questions and might need some outside counsel to then go back in to ourselves and deliberate some more. This week's Torah portion, Shoftim, begins with some images that we might expect in and around a courtroom or a police station. If we take the very first 2 words of the Torah portion, Shoftim, Shotrim, these words come right down to us thousands of years later in modern Hebrew as judges and officers, like police officers. It seems like, from the commentary I looked at, that in the ancient tradition, at least through Rashi's lens, so maybe medieval and ancient, bound up together, Shoftim, a shofet, is someone who pronounces a sentence, whereas a shoter is someone who is more of an enforcer, if you will. Maybe there's something parallel to at least the way in which, in an idealized criminal justice system, we imagine our judges and our law enforcement. But what's interesting about this opening of the Torah portion is that even though we hear about Shoftim and Shotrim, sometimes translated as officers and magistrates, judges and magistrates, in the plural, we are told that we should appoint these people in the singular. And in fact, perhaps the most famous line in the Torah portion, tzedek tirdof, justice will you pursue. Being in the singular is also a reminder that justice begins with the individual. I want to suggest that even though the opening verse goes on to tell us that we should appoint these judges and officers in our gates, sha'arecha, again in the singular, that perhaps one of those gates, though again most of the commentators say this means the city gates, I want to suggest that perhaps this also means starting with our own gates, the gates of our homes, the gates of what is near to us, even the gates into our own psyches, so that when we do this cheshbon hanefesh work, and when we do it seriously, we can be deliberative. We can be judges. Heck, we can be a jury of 12 for ourselves. We can float different ideas and rethink our actions in the past so that we can be better equipped not to repeat the actions that we regret and focus on actions that are beneficial. It's intriguing that Shoftim is always the first Torah portion read in the month of Elul. So this whole season, this whole penitential season, really has a bookend that seems pretty dramatic. If we say, in the singular, each of us, I'm looking at you all at home too, each of us should have judges and officers, not just in our entire societies, but we should be doing some kind of a work of deliberately judging ourselves. At the other end, or close to the other end, depending on how you count, of this season, on Yom Kippur night, we open the evening with Kol Nidre, a declaration that says that any vows that we have made, or will make, depending on which formula you look at, any vows that we have made will be considered null and void. We turn the bima into an earthly court, if you will, Torah scrolls by the side of the Chazan, and make this proclamation. Curiously, we're a tradition that went from biblical times in which there is a lot of discussion about vows. Neder is a word for vow, right? Nidre is the Aramaic plural here. And over time, though there is a whole tractate of the Talmud about vows, clearly the trend is not to make formal vows before God. That somehow this is not a recipe for great things. So what does it mean that we take this melody that often goes right to our hearts on Yom Kippur Eve at the end of this season, and we release ourselves of vows that we probably never even made, formally speaking, since we're so far, usually, from tradition, from times in the tradition in which we formally stood before witnesses and said, I vow before God, such and such. I like to think that what Kol Nidre is doing for us, what this proclamation of release is doing for us, is that it's saying, you know that part of you that promised yourself a year ago that you were going to do this, or that you were going to change this, or that you were going to be better at this, and you didn't quite live up to your own standard? Well, you got to try better. But I like to think the tradition is suggesting that we shouldn't punish ourselves twice. That we already are left with a feeling that we didn't succeed in a way in which we said to ourselves, we're going to do better, I'm going to do better, I'm going to commit to do this instead of this. But that perhaps the edge is taken off by saying you're being released from the fact that you might have promised it to yourself in a way. As if our shortcomings, because we always have shortcomings, simply exist as our shortcomings, and not like our shortcomings plus. I fell short, but I didn't absolutely commit and say you can rely on me to do this, and then I fell short. Rather simply, I fell short. In a way, though, if we read the opening of this week's Torah portion as personal, that each of us should be so deliberative to be our own judge, jury, police force, if you will, of our own soul. And the other end of the season as letting ourselves just a little bit off the hook. I think we return to that question of what does it mean to criticize ourselves? And what does it mean to criticize ourselves in a way that's productive? There were a lot of nods in the room when I asked you the question, have you ever been your own worst critic? So on the one hand, it seems like the work of the season, the work that Elul opens with, the work that the Torah portion even suggests, is the deliberative work of Cheshbon HaNefesh, of really looking at ourselves carefully. And I think there's an opportunity to find some space in between an extreme criticizing of ourselves with, what was the movie? 12 Angry Men, or people inside our head at every moment, and also just not completely letting ourselves off the hook. There's a book you might be familiar with called Radical Candor. And in the book, Kim Scott, if I remember the author's name correctly, talks about what it means to communicate both clearly and kindly. And one of the ways in which she warns the reader is that if we communicate, and imagine this with someone in your life, imagine this at the workplace, if we communicate leading with just nice, being nice, but without clarity, we might lead ourselves to what she calls ruinous empathy. Ruinous empathy. Leading with so much niceness that we actually forget to do the deliberative work of reflection. As you could imagine by the title, where she wants us to get is radical candor, a place in which we are being both kind and clear. And perhaps in a way that one could say that the difference between being nice and being kind is that nice might be more about lip service, but kind also means being willing to be open to criticism, being willing to give criticism, accept criticism, to trying to move our places to this idea that getting better because other people have helped us with that, or we're helping ourselves, or we're helping someone else, that's a gift, that feedback is a gift when someone gives it to us. That when we have a moment of clarity for ourselves, that whether internally from that little jury or the universe, that in itself is a gift. Those moments of realization. So I think for me, moving into this period, I want to encourage us to think about centering kindness. Kindness for ourselves, kindness for the people around us, and to remind ourselves that kindness doesn't mean you just say something nice. Sometimes it means saying the thing that's not nice or listening to the thing that's not nice, because ultimately it's much kinder to receive and to give clear communication. It leads to better relationships, deeper forms of understanding. I remember years ago at I forgot what it was called at the time, World Congress of LGBT Jewish Organizations, someone from Beit Mishpacha in Washington, D.C., presented a Yom Kippur reading called Ahavnu, We Have Loved. So on the one hand, we might say Ashamnu, we have trespassed, during our confessional prayers on Yom Kippur. But perhaps after repeating that 5 times, 9 times, whatever it is throughout the day, 10 times, maybe there's a moment to also say, what have we done well in the past year? Not just ashamnu, but ahavnu. A little pat on the back maybe, to recognize that we have to feel good and reward ourselves for the good things. So if we can go back to where we started, I want to suggest that we take whatever internal juries and law enforcement and self-reflection and however we do that in this season, and strive not to be our own worst critics, but perhaps the work of this season is to be our own best critics. And I think the pathway to being our own best critics is striving for that sense of kindness and clarity in how we connect with each other and how we relate to ourselves. It's going to be a wonderful few weeks ahead, and it's also going to be a challenging few weeks ahead as we approach the holiday season together here and in the whole world. And I hope that the more we get to connect with each other and ask ourselves and each other to be the most awesome critics we can be of ourselves, of our communities, and of the world, the more we will move ourselves toward whatever we imagine is a messianic day. Shabbat shalom.